Third-party content has been copied and communicated pursuant to Part 5A or 5B of the Copyright Act, unless indicated otherwise.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Charmaine. I will indeed, and I'll just move this one over as well. So Charmaine and I met online, as where I spend most of my time at the moment, and when she, her profile I think suggested she was coming back to Geelong to do some teaching, so I thought excellent, and certainly it's worked out pretty well, because I think you've got a great resource here to utilise and make the most of. I'm going to be swapping between some online stuff, as I said, which is most of where I've been doing my BIM work for the last year or so, mainly under this banner, brand, whatever I call it, BIM Day Out, which is a BIM conference we ran in Perth last year for the first time. And we'll have some announcements about the next one, hopefully at the end of this presentation, and also a little bit about my work that I've done, sort of more of international BIM, which is our Worldly BIM, borrowing from the Worldly Deacon, which we thought was pretty clever, but no one else did. So we'll go through that as well. There was one other thing that, whilst hopefully by sleight of hand you're looking over there, when Charmaine mentioned that there was one section of the team that didn't really engage with their work. For the last 3 years I've been working with a health architecture group, which is actually to put BIM into healthcare and certainly into the construction of new hospitals, and I will health and I'll show that as well, which is just goes to will prove at the end that the nursing and the doctors, of course, could have been involved in that project also. So back to where I was supposed to be, and this is a Windows 8 machine, so I'm a bit lost. I know. So while that's powering up, we'll go over here. There we are. So just as a proper introduction, I'm Matt Rumbelow. So my consultancy is Revitall Systems, or Think BIM, the blog. And I've worked both with Brenton in Autodesk as a reseller, but also for Celebri. I've worked for a few firms actually, Newformer, which is another BIM orientated or practice management orientated software. But mainly since my education in architecture in UniSA, I've been involved with the software side of it. Decided that there was way too many architects, especially in Australia, especially in Adelaide, and fell into teaching like Charmaine. So the first 5 years I taught as a digital design lecturer at UniSA and helped set up that digital design side of the course for architecture, and then moved across here to Melbourne to work with Autodesk and their, at that stage, evolving BIM product through Revit, and then for the last 10 years almost, been mainly focused on both Autodesk software and then into some of the additional or adjunct software, which I'll go into a bit more through here. You'll see the slides as another evening with IFC, so yes, you've sprung me. This is a presentation I've given before, slightly different focus, but IFC stands for Industry Foundation Class. Doesn't stand for Information for Construction, but it could have, and maybe it should have, because it is a unifying format or schema or file type, you could call it, which allows all the different aspects of BIM to come together. Now, for a while there, it's sort of forgotten about or not quite as important as it could have been, but it sort of found a new prominence because of a lot of the government mandates for BIM. So you may have heard that there's a lot of government, especially the UK, America, even in some of the industries in Australia who are mandating Defence Force, for instance, that BIM must be used if they're going to procure new buildings or do renovations, which means they want to have all that data, they want to have it a data-rich workflow, they don't want to go back to paper, which is why the construction industry costs so much, and all the different communication channels that have to happen. And so by mandating that workflow, a lot of the governments have also mandated that it has to be what they call open BIM or open format. So they don't want to get stuck down one particular road, even though the Autodesk road is pretty good. So Autodesk conform to the IFC, and they're certainly getting a lot of programs that do that now. And all the other, let's say, worldly BIM programs can use IFC. And we'll see how important that is, especially when you get to John's presentation, because he now actually programs and writes in IFC, and how that sort of opens up how you can work with BIM, which is quite good. So it's a pretty faint slide here, but you can see that my work in BIM has taken me fairly few places. So Australia and New Zealand was for Autodesk, Nuforma and Celebri. Celebri is probably one of the best known IFC tools because it only uses IFC when it communicates and does a lot of the quality assurance and a lot of the building audits that you can automate now. So again, one of the big reasons that a lot of construction firms and clients are asking for BIM is that rather than just getting a stack of paper and going, oh, I wonder if that's actually what we wanted. Can you remember what we asked for? It automates, it goes through and says, this room is not big enough, this room is too big, this room doesn't have enough chairs or enough windows. It automates that process, so you actually just get all these hotspots coming up in the model, which is fantastic. Also worked with a BIM resourcing firm. It took me over to Vietnam, that's where they were based, as a lot of their studios were set up in Vietnam and also the UK. Should have put that on the list. And also through into China with Autodesk. Autodesk a big presence in China now, and certainly an enormous amount of BIM is coming out of there. And certainly they have a BIM standard, which they're all working towards. So you know, you can imagine if they all get focused, you know, there's a wealth of construction going on in China at the moment, all get focused on BIM, it's a huge effort. And of course America, where actually a lot of the IFC and sort of open BIM group started, which was a little bit ironic for those of you who come from industry, because most people assume that's now much more a European type of open work effort. But IFC itself was started off by the IAI, the Alliance for Interoperability, and later became known as IFC. And there's actually a little video I'll play, which is quite good, and maybe someone like Mark would appreciate it in the audience as well. So again, as I said at the start, why it's important, it's because a lot of these government mandates are requiring you to understand what IFC is and utilise it. And as a client, most clients aren't particularly well educated in architecture full stop, because if you're saying to clients like banks or hospitals or those sort of things, so they are used to just receiving a box of manuals and maybe some drawings, and beyond that they sort of lose everything and no one really knows how it was put together. And so hospitals are probably one of the worst environments to try and refit and retrofit, because no one really knows where anything is, and you can't shut things down, and a lot of the times that's why hospitals are built from scratch. It's just easier that way. But for those who want to be able to continually adapt and modify and change and manage their buildings, having something like IFC as a background for that data, and then attaching things like facility management and work orders and just all the things that go to running a building and running a campus like this, can work better if it's an open format, so you can sort of plug and play throughout that. IFC for Dummies it's not a real book, but certainly the core of the information is that with as much as work and effort goes into creating this BIM, and it's certainly not a single BIM, it's lots of BIMs that go together to create a construction project. There needs to be sort of a unifying element and a way of actually understanding all of that data, and IFC is probably the best way, one of the ways, but the best way of getting that together, and understanding that the client, once they receive that IFC data, it's theirs forever and they can utilise it however they like, as opposed to receiving a package which they really can't open and they can't use, or those sort of things. So that's where the industry, I know, is going, and you'll see a lot of announcements on that. There was, for those from industry, there was an announcement just last night that Celebri, who I used to work for, have joined up with a project portal or a project sharing company called For Projects. It's very similar to, say, Aconex, so you might be aware of here in Australia. And now, once you utilise that software, you can do some of these automated checking and automated QA. So you get a sort of a cycle of that information, and making sure that at each stage that information is being checked off and is correct before it gets passed on to the next one. Now, all of that sounds fantastic and sort of, you know, futuristic and magical, but it's actually exactly what the car industry, I'll say that quietly down here, and aeronautical and aeroplane manufacturers have been doing for years. So no one gets to supply any bolt or part or nut without it being an electronic file, without it meeting a huge QA, without having a work life or a product life history, so called a PLM. And all of that has to take place before it gets supplied and put into anything, planes or cars. So architecture and construction is only really just sort of catching up to where the manufacturing industry have been for years. So whilst it's good for construction, we're just copying other industries, that's for sure. So over here, this one I'll start off by playing. Yell out if everyone's seen it, and I won't play all of it. But this is where the IFC idea, or this is the first bit of marketing spiel that came from that Interoperability Alliance, which later then became known as IFC. If I've got it plugged into the right spot.
One of the biggest construction projects ever undertaken, designed to...
It was it? I'll do the voiceover, and it won't be that hard because he looks like a cross between. Yeah. It's coming from mine. It should. Oh, maybe it's.
It was waiting to join.
No, I plugged it out. That's why you could hear it. All right. Oh, is that what you meant? Right. It's not that easy. It's not that important, but just the gist of it, if I get towards maybe, I think it's the second slide, is that which is that back in 92, 93, the concept of an open file format that could go across all machinery, all programs, and get passed from the initial construction into facilities management, into quantity surveying, and there's a few quantity surveyors in Australia who have picked this up and run with it as their classic computer there, by the way. I think it's a 286 if you're lucky. But even back then they were calling it the way of the building future. Now it's taken a long time to sort of come up, unfortunately. But just about now I think we're in a position where, through especially John showing that you can take geometry and information from any program, run it through IFC, formalise it by following some steps, and make wonderful renders like that, which would have taken back then probably about 3 months. But the idea was there. And the original partners, if you see if this turns around, I think, were Autodesk, were a company called Primavera, and Oracle and a few others. So it's good. And HOK, which is a big, now still a big architecture firm in the States, who put this together. At the end of this presentation, and certainly we'll host hopefully the video, but I'll put some links up and you can go and have a look at that wonderful video in full sound. And it's a bit funny to see some of the faces who still work in the industry 20 years later, purporting to utilise this. Anyway, where are we? There's a thing called the hype cycle, and a lot of, some of you may have heard about it, and it's certainly where you get all this sort of noise and all this discussion about things, but it doesn't really eventuate. You know, wearable technology was talked about, 5 or 6 years ago. There was a few things that came out. I think everyone had calculator watches on that sort of gear, well, if you're a geek like me. But only really now they're still talking about it, and even people like Apple are still holding back. It's just not quite right. But certainly smartphones, I mean, the first phone I had wasn't that smart at all. It was pretty dumb. But there's this, the hype of excitement, there's a bubble of disillusionment where people, or the trough of disillusionment where it just doesn't work. You know, these phones don't last, the watches break down, you can't take it in the shower, all these things, and then it actually works. You know, someone comes up with the idea or refines it or comes up with a bit of a breakthrough, and then it actually works and it gets accepted. And then everyone just thinks, well, of course phones have email, and of course phones have geolocators and all this sort of gear. So, plateau of productivity. So, in IFC's term, and we'll go and show this in a second, I think it's about the plateau of productivity. There was a big hype 20 years ago. Everyone thought it was around the corner. It didn't really happen. This trough was for anyone who actually started to use it, and especially those who are using it from different vendors who looked at it differently. It was pretty poor. You'd open up, and Brenton was before his time, so I can say this. Autodesk were probably one of the worst. You'd open it up, it wouldn't show, certain things wouldn't open, wouldn't be the right version or wouldn't be the right code. It was pretty horrible. But now it's working very well across a lot of products, just out of the box. There are some tweaks. People like John tweak it and can see where some programmers aren't sort of following, a bit like HTML, not following the path properly. But now it works good enough that some of the major buildings, Hobart Hospital, are being required to be delivered in IFC. And HTML on the web was a bit like this. That's what this slide is showing, where you think this is going to take off. the web expectation, everyone making money on the web, then there's a big crash, the e-crash, and now it's sort of coming back again. You get some big money being paid for big companies, and they can show that in some cases they've got a bit of a profitability about them. You'll see here in this case, I think if you can see on the screen here, there's that big hype before the stock market crash, and all the venture capital people lost all their money because a lot of these companies were nothing. There's just an idea in a website, and then now the web is back in popularity again. That tech wreck of 2002. This is an example for 2012, so it's only a couple of years ago, but a Gartner put this together and showed all the things that were on this cycle, all the things that everyone thought were pretty cool. Crowdsourcing and big data were on the hype 2 years ago. I reckon they're actually now in the plateau. That's probably a quick one. Near-field communication, NFC's up there, a whole heap of things. 3D printing was a big hype. Then it didn't work, everything fell apart, the resolution wasn't good enough. Now a lot of people are talking about, 123 catch, 123 catch? 123D. You can productise anything. In fact, sooner or later you'll get to a point where if your iPhone face cracks, you just print yourself another one. All that sort of stuff is going to be mind-boggling. Speech recognition was up there and a few other things. In this particular, and I can't see it now for the life of me, is the idea of virtual construction, which has gone on to be known as VDC, and certainly the idea of being able to control a whole building cycle through software is just there, or just around the corner. So turn the corner, plenty of good software to do it, and also the IFC4 will allow for this interoperability across all these programs as well. So why is it important? Certainly it's important because it allows you to use the tool that's best for that job as opposed to the tool that communicates with the other tool. It allows you to define specialist tools within this cycle or within this framework of IFC that might do one thing really, really well, as opposed to a generalist tool that does a lot of things but all are a bit clunky. And again, I'm not singling out any software in particular, but it's a bit like Microsoft Office. Some things it does really well, some things are horrible. But everyone has to use it because there really isn't another way around it. And certainly people from the Open Doc Foundation would say that there were, that 10 years ago trying to do the same thing. They could see that Lotus 123, which probably no one in this room knows of, or maybe a couple, and all these other old programs have fallen by the wayside because of the dominance of something like a Microsoft. We don't really want that to happen in construction or any industry really, and so that's why things like IFC are important. And it allows you to extend the information by adding, in a defined framework, extra bits. So in reality, building information modelling, well, we've been doing building for a long time. Modelling is not that fantastic. We've been doing that for a bit as well, depending on the computer. But it's the information which can be stored now, which is the absolutely critical part to BIM. And if you get your head around that very early, look, design is fantastic, and I'm the first one to admire good buildings. But the information you can assign to it and put into that cycle and allow other people to get it back out again is the actual key. So here's some just a list at the moment, and this was again from last year, so it's probably improved even more so, of programs that conform to IFC and are IFC certified. And you'll see most of the big ones are there, and certainly you've got programs that you probably wouldn't have come across. In the US, so actually it's more the EU, we've got a lot more BIM-compatible programs than we probably have access to. So they've got Allplan, and NEMScheck is quite big over there, DDS and all these other bits and pieces. But even the ones you may have heard of, so Frank Gehry's Gehry Technology, which is built on CATIA, uses IFC, or can use IFC. Vectorworks, which is a pretty popular one in Europe as well. The Revit's compatible. We're up to, and there's different types. Obviously, there's structural programs which you look at. So I think we've got some GHG people in the room. So the amount of information that the structural engineer wants and the way they can test and flex that model is different to, say, the service engineer wants to do, and it's different to what the architect needs. So that's why you need that interoperability across these programs as well. And Celebri down towards the end, which is a model viewer. So viewing models is hypercritical now, because if you've got that many people who need to be involved in the decision-making process and you want them to respond to design changes and that flow-on effect of a small design change, a little bit like the butterfly flapping its wings idea. Everyone needs to know about what that change might be, and a lot of times it's not until it's built that people go, oh, no, you couldn't have put that there because of such and such. And retrofit work is the most expensive, certainly from an ecological point of view and just financial. You want to avoid all of those, beams clashing with walls and floors and all that sort of stuff, which is horror stories, but still happens today, which we're obviously trying to avoid. Here's just a couple of programs that are particularly good at their IFC use. This slide deck will talk about slavery towards the end, but I'll also flip over to some of the ones that are being used in healthcare, because I think you've got a St John of God's project here in Geelong, which has all been done in BIM as well. And then I'll wrap up with some of the BIM Day Out information that we put together, and certainly show some small little interviews and videos from that undertaking, and talk about some of the other events that might be happening this year to do with education of BIM and some of the impacts of BIM. Legal BIM, so BIM in contract management, BIM in the actual procurement of projects and the legal responsibilities is probably the biggest untouched area at the moment, because as all these programs get better and information can go back and forwards and be shared, a lot of the contracts that are in place and a lot of the agreements that and why we have a building industry the shape the way it is, that's going back to an old-fashioned idea of paper and tradies. And if all that's changing, our contracts and our understanding and our relationship to each other has to change as well. And a lot of times some of these projects can't go towards BIM or can't do a full BIM because the contracts are outdated and they don't have that sort of ability for the information to flow back and forwards in the same sort of way. So that needs to catch up, and there's going to be an event this year hosted globally which will talk about the legal aspects of BIM and look at some of the contracts that might have to change. So just a side note, and I'll throw back to Charmaine. So in the practice management or contract management subject, you're going to be talking about BIM in that, and what sort of...
yeah, there will be a small part, but not in the near future.
Yeah, okay, so it's going to...
run that event with Jane.
Oh, true, you could feed that back into it. Yep, yeah. Excellent.
So we have some worldly connections, especially with the students and teachers here from Deakin. Hopefully being able to connect with the US, who are, again, like the UK and that, about 5 years ahead of us, have more of a grasp and an understanding of the legalities of BIM. Hopefully we'll get connections with some of the universities and do some collaborative work with them.
I mean, the biggest one at the moment, and I'll come back to some of the software, but you can see the power of having this model and having all the information about the building that you're going to be then running for the next 30, 60 years is incredibly powerful. However, who owns the model and who actually has paid for it is still unknown. A lot of the times when the architecture contracts are written, all the client actually owns is that final bit of paper at the end. That's all they're sort of legally required to hand over. There's a whole heap of information that is accessible and can be accessed. In the past, architects have sometimes charged for it, sometimes they've gone into business and they just can't get hold of it. Engineering firms, all that sort of stuff. This paper trail that exists in construction is generally not handed over. And a lot of times the clients would want everything about the project anyway, but a concise set of a model that they can then add to and keep working with is critical. And even that, at this stage, hasn't been fully thought of in some of the contracts, and certainly, most importantly, some of the fees. So you've got some firms going out there at the moment tendering and putting prices forward, saying, oh yeah, and then that includes BIM, we can do it for that, and then realising they can't. That this undertaking is much bigger than what they thought. They then aren't able to actually do BIM for that price. They come back and ask for money, or the project doesn't happen in BIM, or even worse, they say, well, we'll give you the model, but you're going to have to charge, pay more for it. All these things need to be completely sorted out before it will, we can say there's a smooth BIM process. BIM server. So one of the things that will allow for this sharing of information and sharing of this the BIM will be hosting it. So at the moment, the cloud is huge, and the cloud was probably somewhere on that trough of on the hype cycle. Because certainly, if anyone who's lost any cloud information, I didn't have anything on .com or Mr.com, whatever the site was. But losing information is a big deal, even if your hard drive crashes. So there's a bit of hesitancy at the moment about putting information online. Although it's quickly dissipating, I think the uptake of things like AConnect and other programs and ProjectWise and BIM 360 dissipates that. But certainly if this information is in the cloud, who gets it, who can change it, who can access it? And so things like BIM server become very important. So the idea of this is it's hosting an IFC model and information, and people can log on with different permissions and get access to just the bit they need. And certainly Autodesk offer a package that does that as well. The ROFUS, you may, for those of you who might go on into working with healthcare work, that's a particularly powerful product, using IFC as its core code, but allowing you then, this is actually in, it's in Finnish? No, it's Norwegian if you can read that. But this is an entire hospital complex in an online world or an online browser, and breaking down into departments and nursing areas and hospital areas, and at any point you can just fly around the model, click on different components, ask information about where certain things are located, and it's all available in this view. So when I was saying before about hotspots showing where things aren't meeting the requirement, aren't meeting the brief, these are quickly showing you there's 4 places at the moment, which in this case is looking at, where are we, room reports, models, duplicates, I think, so things which are actually in more than one place and not meeting the brief. So yeah, just an instant sort of overview of what's happening to that model as the project is progressing. So the DOROFUS program is actually being used currently up in Gold Coast for Sunshine Coast University Hospital. This is actually an amazing slide when I first showed it, because it's actually an ArchiCAD product, an ArchiCAD and Revit project at the same time, and the way those two programs are working together is through IFC. So they're both posting up their versions of the models, or their parts of the models, and coming together in IFC. And then the construction firms, the nursing staff, the people who are procuring the hospital can see that come together, which is pretty amazing. Trimble, now at this stage I don't think Trimble had bought Vico, but Vico is a product, you may have heard of things like Navisworks, and Celebra does this a bit as well, but Vico is a virtual construction suite of tools, and that allows for, again through IFC, to analyse the entire building, timeline, estimate, pull together work schedules, figure out who is best to work where on which site, through a thing called load levelling. So an amazing software kit, and I'm not sure if you're the construction students, and certainly in the Uni New South Wales they're teaching a bit of Vico. But yeah, an incredible package to actually understand the complexities of construction. By what you may have heard of as 3D, 4D and 5D, and then some people are talking about 6D, 7D, 8D as well. Now, I'm trying not to embarrass myself by getting this wrong, but everyone's probably familiar with obviously 2D and 3D. 2D is a flat drawing that you give someone and they can try and figure out what that means. 3D is putting together the geometry, so bringing in the Z-axis and actually allowing people to see the entire construction at once. And 4D is bringing in the cost associated with those. So if you start adding the cost of all the elements to those items, I think I got this right way around, then that's known as 4D. 5D is time, maybe the other way around. And so if you then know what the time it takes to build all those elements and what you need to resource to have people on site to bring those together, as 5D. 6 and 7, there's still a bit of debate around those, but certainly you can look at its energy use and its environmental cost. And so what does it cost to run this building over, say, 30 years? That can be known as the 6th dimension. And then you've got other costs associated with running the building. So maybe 6D is more the facility itself and how you actually run all the items that are in the building. And 7 and 8D, well, how much it costs to run to the earth, how much carbon and how much emissions, all those things as well. So you can take this to, not quite infinitum, but the more information you can pack into this model, the more you can do with it. Now, this is looking at some of the breakdown of a work breakdown structure for this construction through Vico. This still allows you to use 2 different views and come in as a bird's eye view or a 2D view, as you would say, but assigning all the elements to a timeline and looking at what they call flow or load levelling, so you can actually see what parts of the building are being constructed when, how to increase that, and how to get more efficiency through that as well. So a pretty sort of nerdy breakdown of what it requires to build a building, but that's the sort of level of information that up into the past, it's usually in the project manager's head, and not a completely it's more of an art than a science. Whereas here, you can certainly break down all of the elements of the building, run it through these sort of programs, and then figure out how best to proceed, and more efficient. I mean, you don't want people on site sitting around in their work boots doing nothing because the truck hasn't arrived, or they can't get in because the other truck hasn't left yet. All of this stuff is just ridiculous, but it happens, so we're trying to avoid those. The other thing that, this is actually now a Celebri screenshot, but what that actually allows you to do, in this corner here you can see that, again, all of the elements of the model are broken down into a tree or a hierarchy, and then you can start running rule sets or queries through that model. So you can start saying, well, how many of the rooms do I have which have maybe hand basins but no toilets, or toilets but no hand basins, and all these different combinations. Now, you don't have to sit down and program all of those in. A lot of these rules are already written, already listed, and it will run through and churn through an entire building, and then 10 minutes later give you a report. Right, here are the rooms that you might want to check because it doesn't quite match to what you did with the previous job. The other thing, most importantly about BIM, is it allows you to capture those mistakes and make sure it doesn't happen on the next job too. So you say, right, next time I run a check, I'm going to make sure I always check for this, this and this. And therefore you get better quality buildings all the way through.
Matt, do you know if the BCA have produced a rule something like this?
Very, very good. So all of the statutory authorities in our country don't believe it's their duty to create any of these, as an information package. Certainly they still write the rules, so the Building Code of Australia, accessibility, Part M, I think in the UK, I think it is, for equal access. But they don't write the rules in an electronic form. So Celebri actually now in the latest version have made like an online rule sharing. It's a bit, I guess it's a bit like iTunes or something along those lines. So if you make a rule, and QUT have actually done this for disabled access, then you can host it and other people can download it and share it. And because usually the equal access rules or accessible access rules are pretty similar around the world. Wheelchairs are a certain width, they take a certain amount to turn around, and door handles, that sort of stuff. So there are some information that you can download already and share, but unfortunately at this stage the government aren't putting any money into making, it'd be fantastic to get your point, that if they sat down and made these rule sets that they gave to everyone and they can run it all through something like a Celebri, that'd be brilliant. But they don't see that as their role. However, in Norway, our wonderful Nordic friends, they have done that. So their building surveying department actually has written the rules. They paid Celebri and another company to do it. And now all of the building permits they issue, they run it via IFC through a building check first. It just makes sense that you would do that. So that's called Tilda. Basically, the Rufus's claim to fame was that it did that checking to begin with and allowed for that checking. And then it went off into doing hospitals because they're probably the most complicated buildings that need the most checking. So a good use of that technology for sure. Now, I'll stream through some of these to get onto the good bits. This is what I was talking about before. So, you found, in this case, there's 2 toilets that have been found, but there's no associated hand washing stations or any of the other things that you'd need for a toilet. Or maybe there's, in this case, I think it was missing a pan. Components do not match. Can't quite see what they're looking for there. But bang, in the model, shown very graphically, very easy to see, very easy to print out, give to someone on site, say, look, can you go find out why this has come up as an error? This is a huge one, which at this stage I think only Celebri and maybe a program from IES do, which is exit tracking and route and path to exit. So you can say, right, here are my populated rooms, here are my designated fire exits, figure out how long it takes me to get out and see if that meets code, and how many paths and turns I need before I can do that. Again, all of this can be automated, so there should be no reason why buildings still get built being wrong. Space validation, well, this is quite easy to do, unfortunately, in some BIM programs, but you've got a room, which the room itself is not defined. In this case, this was an ArchiCAD error for a long time, anyone who wants to bash ArchiCAD. But Revit had this problem with ceilings, so they're about the same. Where the room space itself didn't actually meet the volume because you had to regenerate that or reassign it. And a program like Celebri finds that. So in the case of Celebri, I'll just go forward because it sort of is a good overview of all the different things it can do. And again, we haven't even touched touched on design software and how, how you can design the building, but once the building's designed, you can go through all of these processes and validate through IFC, which is amazing. I was talking before about accessibility rules, so making sure all the rooms meet that particular information. So now I'll swap over to, very quickly, this. Let's see if I can find it. There we go. And just for the sake of anyone who's... Where's next? Well done. Oh, I know why. Because it's not actually the presentation. Anyway, you won't have to believe me on that. It hasn't downloaded fully. That hospitals are a huge user of BIM and should be. So all the and for some people who have seen a little bit about families or components or chairs and tables and all that sort of componentry, imagine the amount of information that's in a fit out of a hospital. All of that can be associated with BIM files, BIM models. And all of that can actually then be run through similar programs for costing and who's the best to order all this information from, and does it meet the standards of the bench or the sort of stuff that you need as well. I'm going to flick over to this screen now, so that's some funny faces in the background. I'll just go to the front screen of this. So what people may have, and certainly from Charmaine's presentation, is that there's a huge amount of information to share about BIM, and certainly BIM as opposed to CAD, for those of you who've been around a long time. I think it's because maybe the communication process is a lot easier now with people who are picking up BIM as opposed to when they're picking up CAD. There's a wealth of information online that people share and are trying to share, and stopping people having to do the hard yards, as I'd say. And all of those usually come together now through an enormous amount of BIM events and BIM websites and BIM talks and BIM people like Charmaine. But they weren't really coming down to Australia. And what we found is that there was a couple of software-specific events. So RTC, for some of you who might have heard of it, is about Revit. But there are other events we saw happening in the UK and in the US, which were more just about BIM in general. And how things were sharing across different platforms. And so we wanted to come up with an event like that as well. So last year we held the first one in Perth. Perth because no one ever goes to Perth for these sort of events, so they felt a bit left out. And we felt if it bombed, then no one would really know about it anyway. But it went really well. So we had a huge turnout. We had a lot of people, including people like John, fly over and fly in to present. Yeah, it went down really well as an open BIM event. If there's time, I'll play some of the videos from that. But that really now has led us into a bit of a momentum to host another one. And we're hoping to host that one in Brisbane this year, towards the end of the year, so maybe 2nd or 3rd October. And then perhaps the year after, if we're still going and still interested, we can have it down here back in Melbourne. This year you've got RTC, which is the Revit technology event that's happening here in Melbourne, I think in May. And that'll be Albert Park. And these are obviously these are small events in comparison, like Autodesk University or Hexagon in the States, which is by a company who do a lot more of oil and gas type computer programs. But still worth trying to get along to some of these, because certainly someone like Charmaine is trying to give you as much information as she can, but things are happening all the time and changing, and certainly depending on the area of your interest, it's not going to be captured all in one place at one time. So if you want to know more about the BIM Day Out, what we've done is we recorded most of the sessions. It's taking us a long time to get them online, but they're getting there. And so you can go into BIM TV, which is over here, and we've got now this information, in fact, if this plays, this will be a good one to show straight off the bat. Not a whole lot, just an intro.
Things over 5D's digital design documentation.
So this is David Bratman from Mitchell Bratman Quantity Surveyors. Now there might be others who do it, but I'm pretty sure David's the only one in Australia for sure. Actually, I didn't want to do that, I wanted to do that. Who's a quantity surveyor. His father was a quantity surveyor, And so Mitchell Brantman is a pretty big name in Northern Australia, certainly through Queensland. And they've gone fully BIM. So they use Revit, they use a bit of Celebri, they use a program called Costex. And all of the information, all of their quantity surveying, so what's normally done on paper and pencil and a calculator is now done through BIM, which is fantastic. Now, not all the models they get are as good as everyone else's models, but where they are lacking, just trying to get some best feedback, they can then communicate back to the architect or the construction firm and say, look, this bit's missing, and they go, oh, hell, yeah, you're right, actually we didn't put the toilets in. So they act a bit like a quantity survey, a bit like a QA check. And hence the reason why they decided to use Celebri as well. They want to automate a lot of those processes. So David's talk, and these are all online, there's nothing to pay. Just go to the BIM Day Out website and go to BIM TV and you'll find it. He actually goes through the elements of BIM. He goes through from almost like from a BIM for Dummies perspective. Because he admits that's where he was when he wanted to learn about it. Not being an architect or not coming from that background, but just as a pure QS. And he's probably one of the best, certainly in our region. At understanding. So all of his team now, across about 7 offices, are BIM QSs. So that's that 4D or 5D bit. We also have a lot of other information about some of the or talks coming up, which are the sort of accessories to BIM. So not the design software itself, but all the software that sits around the edge in that sort of BIM cycle. And then we have some just interviews with some of the providers and some of the sponsors who were there. I'm just trying to think of one that might be... No, we won't worry about this stage. But certainly... Have a look. Was there one from... No, I'm just trying to think of one that might be appropriate for here. But they're all pretty useful insights. As far as what happened on the event, if we go to program, you'll see it was a 2-day event with a fair lot of sort of lead-in and a fair bit of partying as well, because that's, you know, we took that as from the AU experience, that's for sure. Certainly we had some free spaces which are available for anyone who was part of a user group. So that's the other thing that maybe through someone like Charmaine might be missing down here in Geelong, is that in Perth they've got Warug. Certainly in Melbourne we've had Revit, which has been running for about 7 years, which is a user group for people who are using the software but just want to share some information. Now, my wife calls it the loser group, so it can be a bit geeky, but it's a good way to get together and share and get over some of the hurdles that are stopping you from moving on in other aspects. Or, you know, invite down, you know, some good BIM proponents like, you know, what you've done today, and then use that as a bit of a user group as well.
Is Revit going to be revamped?
That's a good question. So for those of you who know about Revit, that's been going along for 7 years tirelessly by some good people. But because it's focused on Revit alone, they've sort of got a bit exhausted what they can talk about, I think. BrisBIM, which exists, in fact I'll show you it right now. This is probably the way most user groups are going to go, and certainly this is the way some of the user groups have gone in the States, which is more of an open forum about all technology to do, in this case with BIM. These guys are going really, really well. They've had some excellent presentations all of last year, received some really good sort of foundation sponsorship by lots of the BIM players and construction firms, engineering firms. And so Revit, to answer your question, is probably going to reform as something like a BIM group. And I hope it sort of becomes like a travelling BIM group, so there's no reason why they couldn't come down here and do presentations as well as regional. Bendigo Hospital, Ballarat Hospital, is a fully BIM project as well. So if you are out and about, or get up in, certainly keep your ear out for what's happening with these groups. That's another good place to find information. The other one too, again with technology, New York Revit User Group is excellent, and they host all of their presentations live online, and then often host the recorded versions as well. So you get some really excellent presentations from HOK and SOM and those guys, all for free. Just that's run through a site called Meetup, and look for New York City Revit User Group. Some really good stuff there as well. As I sort of talked about with Charmaine, one of the other things that we're organising for this year is a thing called Smart Build Culture. And this really is looking at how the whole industry, from procurement to financing, legal, dispute resolution. I mean, there's still going to be disputes in construction. It's almost impossible not to. But how let's get this resolved, it's all coming together through this online course or online set of lectures, and can be made into a course through some of the tools that Charmaine was talking about. And that's going to kick off hopefully about March next year. And if we're lucky in securing some more sponsors, we might be able to bring James down, who's the guy who's actually putting this course together. So at this stage, James is a corporate lawyer. As he said, foolishly, he left behind the legal world of what could just be scotch and cigars, and got really heavily involved in construction. And understands why it was such a poorly performing industry, why there was so much work in really silly disputes, and so certainly from my experience in the field, it's a crazy lot of just stupid, wrong door handles or wrong this or wrong that. It could easily have been found out, resolved, not even happened if it was a sort of a BIM flow. And so he's got about a year's worth of lectures that we've already organised, and all of that will come together as a sort of an insight into the legal aspects of BIM and how that could get a lot better. And so the dates at this stage, I think, about March and beyond. There's some intro ones that will happen a bit earlier. They're going to be some live courses. But some of the UK courses have already signed up, or UK universities. Hopefully Deakin will as well, which I'm sure won't be too long. And for education, I don't even think there's going to be a cost. I think there's going to be, I'll have to double check. But certainly at these sort of prices, it's pretty good anyway. But this will give you, certainly for industry, a good understanding of where and how the construction industry can get a lot better with some of the things they're doing. I just note as well, because of one of our partners, the BIM1 or the BIM or the B1M is a group that's formed. Rob Mills and not Rob Mills, Rob. It is Rob Mills. Is looking for the first million BIM users. That's why it's 1M, and they have some excellent information and certainly video-rich information on their site. So I don't know if I've got this link in yet. No, I haven't. But the B1M is a great site as well for sort of feature videos and interviews with the players and how things are developing there as well. And then the last one, that was just the Google Plus site. That was an old one. I was going to show you. So certainly, I think the information that's available through certainly the BIM Day Out would be a good start. The Autodesk Education Portal is actually very good. There's probably 3 or 4 different ways to get to it. I know it's a student's app, but autodesk.com/education. And if you sign up for this, I think this is still the case, Benson, that then you sign up for an education, say passport, I think it's called, or a registration, and then you can access all of the videos and all of the learning from Autodesk University for the last 2 or 3 years. So unfortunately, you don't get the beer, the bad smoky smell and the hangover, but it's still a good way of experiencing some of the information that comes out of Vegas, and also free software. So this software, I think the only catch with the free software, it's a 36-month license, which is excellent, is that there is a watermark on any of the output. Not anymore.
No, we cancelled it about a year and a half ago.
Wow.
Because of a lot of reasons.
There was a lot of, well, it worked really well in the CAD version. So when the AutoCAD had a watermark, it was great because you couldn't get rid of it at all. I never really saw it in the Revit, so maybe you never got around to that, which was good.
It was cracks, as people find, whenever you try to do something, there was cracks. But I think just to make it more usable, a lot of schools still use students to print things out.
And having a big...
Autodesk across it, so
yeah.
there's a lot of complaints about that, so it was removed. Yeah, she's probably enough year ago, to be honest.
Okay, well that's great. And certainly the big catch there, of course, and with Brenton in the room will certainly remind you, is that the software companies have really, I mean, I think Adobe may have been the first one to really think, well, these are our future customers. Just have the software. We don't care. Use it, fantastic. When you go into business, however, when you start making money off this software, that's when you need to buy it. And a lot of software companies have actually stopped a lot of the license, I wouldn't say checking, but they put a lot more money into following up with license breaches, following up with audits, following up with some of the systems like small Business Software Association of Australia, who actually will audit companies and audit people who for making sure they've got compliant licenses. That's not with Autodesk, it's everything, so Microsoft and Adobe and all that sort of guys. Now, as a bit of a hint, they probably won't go after someone from their first year out. You know, you never know. But some big firms have been done for some big license breaches, so it can happen to anyone. So yeah, by all means, it's certainly a lot safer to download the education software, Tekla Campus, Autodesk education community, than it is to try and get cracks and download viruses and all the other stuff that comes along with that goodness. But all of the information, you can see, look, there's really nothing that I have that's online, that's not online and not available for you to download. And there's certainly terabytes of data here, so I wouldn't be downloading all of it at once. But certainly from the some of the more recent, more 3D printing type of do-it-yourself manufacturing type programs, all the way up to the huge, in this case, oil and gas, mechanical, civil, almost to the town planning through InfraWorks. Anything's there, which is a sensational spot to go to. I think the other one was just Campus at Tekla, if I remember. Maybe. Tekla, but yeah, I'll send it. I'll put the link on the site for the Tekla one as well. That's also taken a leaf out of the Autodesk book, and they've got a lot of the information and a lot of their training manuals online as well. 6:22, we're going pretty well. I might throw over to John if there's not any other thing that's...
We'll do like an open forum.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best thing to do. So certainly my leave you with the thought of, first of all, thinking outside the one package or the one mindset, looking for other tools and other things that might assist you, learning as much as you can about ways of bringing those tools together, so IFC as I mentioned in this presentation, but also searching for other sources of education, and certainly happy to get involved with something like this through Charmaine, because I think it's extremely important. Don't forget then to give back to the idea of if you find out something, discover something, put it on a blog, email it to me, I'll put it on a blog. Just sort of share that, because I think that's the easiest way to get over some of the learning curves, and the easiest way to learn from others. So even all the people here on the, not sure what one's live at the moment, maybe this one here, all the speakers from the BIM Day Out, I wouldn't say they're all experts. I would say some of them was the first time they've actually spoke, which was really good. We had about 2 or 3 complete newbies, but they all took the time to get up to present about what they knew best. And we've got a couple of students and that's the other thing we did with the BIM Day Out, is the students came along for free, and they were basically what we call our BIM roadies. So they helped network and set things up, and they're sort of the glue that held the whole conference together. But yeah, some of these were the first-time presenters, so don't be shy, and certainly maybe Charmaine will encourage that as well to get involved. To reiterate, certainly all of the links, or most of the links that you've seen tonight, some people have furiously taken down notes, which is excellent. You get better points, but we'll post that up on the website and as an email for sure.